जय भारत। वेलकम टू डेफ टॉक्स क्लिप्स बाय आदि अचिंत। जैसे ही आपने मेरे बड़े चैनल जो डेफ टॉक्स बाय आदि है उसको आपने जिस तरह से सपोर्ट करा, उसी तरह से ये हमारे क्लिप्स के चैनल को, जहां पर आपको छोटे छोटे अपडेट्स, छोटे छोटे शॉर्ट्स और छोटी छोटी कहानियां मिलेंगी, इसी को भी सपोर्ट जरूर कीजिएगा। लाइक का बटन जरूर दबाइए, सब्सक्राइब तो ऑब्वियसली करिए, बेल आइकॉन दबाना बिल्कुल मत भूलिएगा। एंड हाँ जी, प्लीज अपने दोस्तों के साथ, फैमिलीज के साथ ये वीडियोस जरूर शेयर करिएगा। एंजॉय करिए ये क्लिप को। जय हिंद। Major wars, 50, 60 other small wars. Where do you see us standing in the game? And then let's just open the discussion to the subjects that I've decided. So over to you.
Yeah, yeah. Great question. I mean, this is a period of great chaos. I think we are entering a period of chaos. Actually, the 2020s. It all began with the pandemic, right? The Wuhan virus, and then things just went. Then you had the Ukraine conflict, the special military operation. Now you have the Middle East crisis. The Bab el Mandeb Strait is being blockaded by the Houthis, the Ansar Allah faction of the Yemenis, and so on. There's so much happening right now. China is obviously an issue. The US is, and the West is another issue. So, from our perspective, from the Indian perspective, I think we are doing a tightrope walking act, a balancing act. Uh, we are right now, one could say, a middle power. We're not a great power yet, and we are nowhere near a superpower yet. Let's be pragmatic. Let's be realistic, and we historically have been the greatest power, the preeminent power, at least economically. And with economic might, typically when you are politically united, whenever that happens, as a historical cycle, you also have military might. So historically, we have been the preeminent economic power, and sometimes we've been a superpower, like whenever we were united, and that's hopefully where our destiny lies. I mean, we are currently at a state where we are a middle power. We are slowly emerging. So I think from our perspective, we are right now doing a balancing act. We have multiple bigger powers that we need to kind of keep at a certain distance. Certain powers need to be kind of placated and appeased. Certain powers we need to show a stronger approach towards them. So that's where we are right now. And it's actually, this period of chaos may actually, if we do if we play our cards right, may actually work out to our advantage, because you have the US that is worried, really worried about the rise of China, and also the rise of Russia, because Russia is now rising again. It's an autarky. It's a nation that has everything at its disposal, all the natural resources, everything it could need. It doesn't need to import anything from anywhere else. So the US is worried about these two powers. Russia is actually militarily more powerful than China, mainly
Hmm.
because of its nuclear arsenal. It has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And that's what the figures tell us. And then China obviously has risen a lot. How far it will rise remains a question, because of the impending demographic disaster in China, and so much more happening. And the US itself is a declining power. The US, if you look at what's happening internally and so on, and what it's doing to Europe, it's clearly a power that's currently in decline. It's an empire in decline. So that's the and Africa, you have turmoil as usual. Africa is under colonization, even though the European powers don't have armies there, but it's still colonization by proxy. It's neo
Proxy.
colonization. Yeah, so it's colonization by proxy. And then you have various other powers that we need not mention, because they are not that important. So that's the kind of geopolitical global scenario that we have right now. It's kind of a world that's lurching towards chaos. 24 is going to be an interesting year. Elections in India and the US. Russia, like you earlier said, is a kind of a given. Mr. Putin should win. And then you have election in Bangladesh, and the next year you have elections in Japan, and so on and so forth. So a
Hmm.
couple of years with very important elections coming up. uh, so I think from our perspective, just to recap and answer your question, is that right now we're doing a tightrope walking act, a balancing act. We ideally need 20 years in which we are not involved in a major military conflict. If we do that, and if we have political continuity, political stability, then we're going to reach the 10, 10, 12 trillion dollar mark. And by that time, it's going to be very hard to stop us, because by
Yeah.
that time our military muscle will also have grown to a proportionate extent. So that's where we are. We need 20 years of peace and growth. And for that, we need to play the cards right.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Uh, Coming to play the cards right, there's one entity, if I may, which tries and actually off balances the game, and which is the left, the global left, which is there, and it's got its tentacles pretty much everywhere. We've seen that, from creating a pannu to Adani to whole lot of things which we see in front of us today. Uh, I do believe personally that the left has taken a big beat, starting from the Ukraine, starting from COVID. I think with the whole vaccine drama, then to Ukraine, and then now to Israel. It's pretty much like an open book for everybody to read. How do you see the global left today, and their, might I say, desperate actions against India?
Uh, when I think of the global left, there's only one nation that comes to my mind, and that's the US, because the
Yeah.
global left is ensconced in the US. Okay, and they are all funded out of the US. So essentially, they look. The US is an interesting nation, a really interesting nation. It's a two-party system, a two-party state that is like one level above a one-party system, like China or North Korea. And both the parties have the same foreign policy. One party will bomb you with black colored bombers, the other one will bomb you with rainbow colored bombers, but they'll do the same thing. So it's essentially a one party system. It's not even a party system, it's something else entirely. It's just a dictatorship, essentially. It's an autocratic nation. It's a nation that's held together by the police force. Okay, you take away the cops from New York City for 15 minutes, there's going to be riots. Okay, that's the kind of kind of nation it is. It's held together by brute force. And the global left, it emanates out of the US. It's a very powerful tool of whoever runs the country. Obviously, by now I think it's clear that Mr. Biden isn't running the country.
Mm.
He is not capable of taking care of himself. Forget about running the country. And Miss Kamala Harris, the less we say about her, the better. She's clearly incompetent. So somebody is running the country. It's still lurching ahead. So whoever is running the country, we can call it the deep state or whatever we want to call it, but I think they control this global left. And the global left is a very powerful tool, this vague, amorphous, diffuse kind of thing that has its tentacles everywhere. I remember when I was a kid. In the 80s, okay, I once saw on TV this Soviet propaganda poster. It was called a propaganda poster,
Mm.
and in that they showed the US as an octopus with tentacles everywhere. So that's the kind of view the Soviets had of the US, that it was a multi tentacled hydra like monster that found its way everywhere. And the US used to call the Soviet Union the evil empire. So that's the kind of propaganda you had. So this global left is kind of like that octopus with multitudinous tentacles
Yeah.
that reach everywhere inside every country. And they clearly have assets deep within India. And not insignificant assets, I would say, rather significant assets they have, without naming any entity or any individual, right? uh, so yes, and they have the global propaganda machinery at their disposal, which I mean the media is propaganda. By now I think the viewer should understand very clearly, by 2023 it should be very clear that media is nothing but propaganda.
Yep.
BBC is the propaganda arm of the UK government, which is a proxy of the US government. The CNN and Fox and whatever are proxy, are propaganda outlets of whatever else. Then you have the Chinese, then you have DW, then you have whatever else, right? So that's how it goes. We in India don't have a propaganda arm, because we are like, we believe in Gandhian values and so on. The point is, the global left has this massive media machinery at its disposal. And you gave some interesting examples. I mean, what they did with Adani, that hit job on Adani, which was clearly all fake, and many other things, right? So they have that. And I expect, I mean, I said this in the beginning of 23, this year itself, that this year you're going to see a lot of chatter on social media, a lot of hit jobs on social media
Yeah.
about India, that India's democracy is backsliding and India's devolving into fascism, and there's a same old stale stories about Hindutva being an evil ideology and whatnot. I think we're gonna see a lot more of that in 2024, the first quarter at least, before the Indian general elections, and you're gonna see a lot more also happening. I mean, India, they would like India to rapidly descend into some kind of chaos of some kind, maybe terrorist attacks. We already have a situation in India's far east. Everyone calls it the northeast, it's actually India's far east, okay? And we
Paris.
have Manipur. Yeah, we have Manipur, which is a state which is at least half of which is under foreign occupation. And these foreign occupiers are not Burmese. They don't even speak the Burmese language or practice Burmese culture. They have emerged out of China's Yunnan. Okay. So half of Manipur is under foreign occupation right now. And these these occupiers, these infiltrators, they, on the other side of the border, they are fighting the Burmese government. Now, now we know who is supporting the anti-government forces in Burma. It's the US. It's well known. They have multiple ways of supporting these anti-government proxies of theirs in Burma. And the same proxies are occupying half of the state of Manipur. That's the situation in India's far east. Then you have the recent news of what's coming, that's emerging out of Jammu and Kashmir, more infiltration from POK, from Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So you're gonna see the global left's media propaganda machinery that's going to be unleashed upon us, and you're going to also see some harder actions taking place on the ground. I mean, recently I think section 144 has been imposed in Mumbai because of some terrorist activities that were caught and apprehended and all that. I think we need to be really careful in India the next 3-4 months. I'm sure the government is more than aware of this. So yeah, that's the situation. So coming back to the global left, they obviously would like to see a regime change in India, and the global left is part of the US State Department or whatever department's uh, toolkit. It's part of their arsenal. It aids and abets regime change operations by setting the ground, by setting the tone. That if you want, let's say, regime change in Bangladesh, you spend a year putting out op-eds and hit pieces about Sheikh Hasina, that she's evil and she's a dictatorial lady and so on and so forth. And then you convince the people of Bangladesh who read English that this is the case, because it's all coming from high up, from the BBC, from the CNN, and whatnot. So it's all propaganda, and that's how you prepare the ground for the eventual regime change operation. So they would obviously want a regime change in India in 2024. They would like a weak coalition government to come to power, because such a government would be way more pliable, and that would make India a much better, more amenable resource for them to exploit. So yeah, there we are.
जय हिंद। जाने से पहले मैं 1 मिनट के लिए आपको रोक लूं, तो प्लीज ये चैनल को लाइक जरूर करिएगा, सब्सक्राइब करिएगा, और हाँ, हमारे जो मेन चैनल को जरूर जरूर अपनी फॉलोशिप दीजिए, ताकि हम आपको अच्छे अच्छे पॉडकास्ट, इंपॉर्टेंट सब्जेक्ट्स एंड जियोपॉलिटिकल अपडेट से आपके सामने प्रेजेंट करते रहें इसी तरह से। थैंक यू सो मच। जय हिंद, जय भारत।